Okay, I think we're all set up now. I apologize to everyone for the delay. Om Jnana Timinandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Jakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sohorito Godai Pushpavanto Chitra Sando Tamarado Vandeham Shri Rama Krishna Abhaya Charnasago Sukaro Paramanando Sundaro Subalapriyo Mancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Okay, welcome to everyone. My pranams to all the devotees listening, all those that may listen to the recording. We're continuing our, let me just pin my video, there we go. We're continuing our recording, our classes on Prahlad Maharaj, the nature of his simple-hearted devotion as we see displayed in Srimad Bhagavatam. Just a slight recap, probably even more slight now because I got delayed a little, but my first class was an introduction looking at Prahlad Maharaj and his relationship with Krishna. You could see him as a Dasya Bhakta, as a Shanta Bhakta. Different acharyas have described it slightly differently. I think either way, we can see him as kind of a foundation of devotion to the higher rasas in Vaikuntha and Braj. He kind of embodies central qualities that are not only pertinent to him, but are also pertinent to all the rasas of Braj and so forth. So we looked a little bit how we could see Prahlad's quality of simplicity, his simple-hearted devotion. We looked a little bit into how we can see that manifest in the residents of Braj. We also talked a little bit about how it's really important to see these foundational qualities of devotion, of sadhana, in their highest expression, and how quality like simplicity, to see that as a part of the ideal, will help us identify with that quality, and also inspire us to kind of continually develop it, continually churn that quality, and see how it may express itself. Qualities of Prahlad that really stood out as embodiments or kind of constituents of his simplicity. And those four qualities were detachment, not wasting time, universal compassion, and one-pointed focus. So in this class, we're going to start off with detachment by Ragya, very, very heavy start to the simplicity of Prahlad's heart and corresponding devotion. So when I was planning this series, I had a little hesitation to talk about detachment. Not necessarily because it's heavy, because it's not the most favorite topic for devotees, but I thought it was too obvious. Um, I thought it was too obvious that detachment is a constituent of simplicity. And I was thinking, maybe I could find a more special, more unique connection to simplicity, some other kind of quality that may not be as readily understood, connected with simplicity, and contribute something unique in that way. But as I was reflecting on that, I was thinking, man, that's really like the exact antithesis of this whole series. To try to make an effort for something special, to make an effort for something unique. I think it's a very limiting idea, first off, to try to this need to be unique, special, because really if every step, every kind of movement we're making has to be unique, it's hard to move. We're always kind of catching ourselves like, is this really special? Is this really worth sharing? Is this really worth doing this service? Is it really going to be accepted and appreciated? And same with, giving class, talking. If we feel like we have to contribute something unique, special, um, we're going to be very hesitant to talk. We're going to, just let the Mahajans talk. But because they have something unique to share. And even listening, listening to advanced devotees. I was talking about this with Gaur Sundar, who's a devotee here at Madhuvan recently. The waiting to hear something unique in a class. Listening to Guru Maharaj or any acharya that you've listened a lot to, and just kind of waiting for that new point. What's that new point that I can add to my box of um, unique insights? So I mean, it's a balance, right? Bhakti, of course, is developing. It is always growing, always increasing. But we just have, I think, I noticed this in myself when I was preparing this. I have to be careful not to try to impose or make effort to be unique, to be special. I think if we approach something um, simply, humbly, straightforward, um, not trying to find the most creative roundabout, I think Krishna will make it special. I think if we're blessed by Krishna, he'll move us in such a way that when we approach something simply and straightforward, then he'll make it unique, because bhakti is always fresh, always new. Um, so it comes back to that same idea we were talking about last class, that Bhaktivedanta Tirtha Maharaj mentioned in his introduction on Prahlad Charit. He talked about progress means same thing, new taste. Um, so it's it's really important to hear these foundational, straightforward stuff we think we know, to hear them over and over again and um, try to let it go a little deeper each time. Try to allow it to become part of us a little more each time we hear it. And in that way, it naturally will develop, will grow through the beauty, the sweetness, the ever dynamic nature of bhakti. Um, So with that in mind, I thought, okay, we'll go ahead and talk about detachment and how it's a really important constituent of simple-hearted devotion. Um, so detachment, like all these other qualities we're going to explore, not wasting time, universal compassion, um, being one-pointed, focused in one's goal. These aren't necessarily, connecting to the last idea. They're not necessarily special in and of themselves. They're mostly just a manifestation of sattva gun in general. To be detached, to see the nature of things, that things come and go, and to not be too strongly swept up by them. To not waste time, to not to not be drawn here and there, but to kind of be focused, to be compassionate, um, and to be focused. These are manifestations of sattva gun onto themselves. Um, but I think it's really important, and part of the reason why we're really interested in these qualities in this series of classes is because these qualities are no longer sattvic when they come in touch with bhakti. They become expressions of bhakti. They become expressions of nirgun bhakti in their highest expression. I mean, just look at the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu expressing all these qualities, and they are nityasiddhas. They're composed of Swarup Shakti, so they're not in touch with the gunas. So it can't be an expression of sattva gun when Haridas shows humility, when Mahaprabhu shows compassion, wanting to deliver the entire world. When well, I guess connected to that, who showed detachment? Um, who out of Mahaprabhu's associates was the most profound expression of detachment? When we look at the fourth verse of Shikshastakam by Mahaprabhu, na dhanam, na jnanam, na sundarim kavitam va. I don't want wealth. I don't want followers. I don't want a beautiful partner or artistic poetry, the arts. I'm not. I'm not interested in any of that. When we reflect on that verse, I think probably the most profound expression of that is Raghunathas Goswami. Raghunathas was born in a very, very wealthy family. His parents were extremely aristocratic, very wealthy. He had an extremely beautiful wife. And we see that he gave all this up through a means, escaped through the woods to make it to Mahaprabhu. And Mahaprabhu, this is in the Antyalila of Chaitanya Charitamrita. It describes the kind of the life story, the life and qualities of Raghunathas Goswami in the sixth chapter, and in that chapter, a very interesting verse is spoken. I guess not spoken, but in the context of Raghunath Das coming to Jagannath Puri, meeting Mahaprabhu, and then kind of successively renouncing more and more. specifically in connection to his way of obtaining food, his way of obtaining sustenance. In relation to that, Mahaprabhu, each kind of successive step Raghunath Das takes, Mahaprabhu becomes very, very pleased. At first, Raghunath is using his parents' money that they're sending to hold festivals for Mahaprabhu and hold large feasts. And then he feels, I feel a bit compromised by this, accepting money from kind of that family quarter and using that to try to serve Mahaprabhu. So then he goes and begs food in front of the Jagannath temple. And then he kind of goes to another section of that's where you just kind of, instead of actually begging, you just kind of sit and wait for whatever comes. And then he goes a step farther and just eats the remnants that the temple throws out and leaves for the cows and animals. So in connection to that, Krishna's Kaviraj, this is 6.2.20, he says, Mahaprabhuda Bhakta Ganera Vairagya Pradhan Yahadeki Prita Hangora Bhagavan. And the translation is, renunciation is the basic principle sustaining the lives of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's devotees. Seeing this renunciation, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is extremely satisfied. So it's a really interesting verse because Vairagya is not even a limb of bhakti. It's not even an anga of the practice of bhakti. It's often considered like a corollary or a byproduct as one grows in attachment to Krishna. But Raghunath Das Goswami, Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami goes as far as to say that it's the principle sustaining the lives of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates. So I think this highlights that kind of crux that we're exploring in this class, that vairagya, detachment, unto itself, Krishna's Kaviraj calls it Kaitava Dharma. It's cheating religion, pretty much. So it's unto itself, it's useless. It just makes the heart proud. But in connection with bhakti, and in this, I think of Padmanabh Swami often uses Rupa Goswami's verse saying that bhakti moves in a crooked way, kind of like a snake. So Padmanabh Swami often likes to emphasize that, like a snake, it picks up everything, going side to side. It doesn't miss anything. It takes everything with it and integrates and brings it to its highest expression. So I think we can see this in the connection to detachment. And so detachment unto itself it's kind of a dry thing, kind of a like an effort-based, more connected to yoga and dhyan. But when we see it kind of being picked up and an expression of bhakti, it actually becomes very sweet. It becomes very beautiful. It's an expression of love. Not taking is part of giving, part of love. And so when it's expressed in the context of bhakti, it's a very beautiful expression. And that way we can kind of see it as the pradhan, the sustaining force. I mean, one way you could talk about detachment is freedom, um, physical and mental and emotional freedom, or space. It kind of like detachment, as you give up things, it provides space, and environment, freedom, um, for bhakti to express itself. Um, and um, in one way, you could kind of see like that idea, in detachment, providing a space, an environment of freedom. You could kind of connect it to like the Dham in that way, like the platform, um, where bhakti can manifest, and in that way you can, uh, maybe you could pray, to Baladev, um, as a way to, Baladev, please, allow me to, cultivate manifest detachment. Help me to cultivate manifest space, freedom in my, in my life.
Is this rice? That's being
For sadhana, for bhakti to manifest, and in that connection, I wanted to show you give you a beautiful darshan of my deity, Baladev. I thought it'd be nice to bring him into this class. So I tried to find a way. hopefully, hopefully it was, in line with bhakti teachings. So turning to Prahlad, like Raghunath Das, Prahlad was also born in a very wealthy, very powerful family. Hiranyakasipu was pretty much the controller of the three worlds, and he had received these boons from Brahma after performing immense austerity. So he's kind of like, Hiranyakasipu means like a soft bed or enjoyment. He's kind of like the embodiment of material enjoyment. So Prahlad is born into this family, and we come to Narad, describing to Yudhishthir that in this family of Hiranyakashipu, this great devotee named Prahlad is born. And so in connection to, detachment, this is one of the first verses that Narad speaks, describing Prahlad. He says, Nodvigya chitta vyasaneshu nishpara shuteshu drishteshu guneshvat avashtudik dantendriya prana sharira di shara prashanta kamo rahita sura sura. And the translation is, although Prahlad Maharaj was born in a family of asuras, he himself was not an asura, but a great devotee of Lord Vishnu. Unlike the other asuras, he was never envious of Vaishnavas. He was not agitated when put into danger, and he was neither directly nor indirectly interested in fruitive activities described in the Vedas. Indeed, he considered everything material to be useless. and therefore he was completely devoid of material desires. He always controlled his senses and life air, and being of steady intelligence and determinations, he subdued all kama, or lusty desires. So I think one interesting note in this verse is that, and he mentioned this in the same sentence. Narad says, Prahlad was not agitated when put into danger, and he was also neither directly nor indirectly interested in the fruitive activities described in the Vedas. So, of course, we know the stories of when Prahlad was put into danger by Hiranyakashipu and his servants trying to kill him. But connected, there's also this other type of material entanglement or danger that Nard speaks of. And he speaks of in neither directly nor indirectly was Prahlad interested in the fruitive activities described in the Vedas. Indirectly means through hearing about, and directly means through seeing, through direct perception of, his direct perception would be of Hiranyakashipu, who was kind of the embodiment of performing tapa, this fruitive activity to gain material results. And so he wasn't drawn to kind of in either of these situations. And the fruitive activities, they represent kind of, I guess, two different angles. One would be like larger goals in life, more connected to like artha or economic development, career, money accumulation, familial type of development progress in those ways. And so Prahlad wasn't interested in that. It reminds me of Guru Maharaj talking about when he would sit in the Santa Cruz Mountains and he would think about what he could be in his life. He could be a police officer, he could be a teacher, all these kind of different paths in life he could take to develop himself. And none of them really, they just, they didn't have like a real substance to them, he felt. He just had a sense that they don't endure. These deeper goals in life that the world's pursuing, I could pursue them, but it really wouldn't change me as a person. It really wouldn't unto itself develop me in terms of what I feel life is meant to be, how I feel the Atma, the soul is supposed to progress in life. And so similarly, Prahlad here isn't interested in kind of that development or kind of smaller goals, or you could say more relation to like kama, like quicker pleasures, to taste this, to hear that, feel this, feel that, kind of these quick stimulations. And the reason why in this verse it's described that he wasn't pulled towards these things is because it's described guneshtu Guneshu avastudik, which means like the objects of these goals, he saw them as insubstantial. He didn't feel, you see them on the surface, but he felt that if he actually explored them, if he actually kind of directed himself in that way, it wouldn't really satisfy himself. He would be left still a little lacking. And so with this vision of kind of seeing these things as unsubstantial, he wasn't drawn in that direction. And the verse goes on to describe, because of that, because of this kind of intelligence, of seeing that I'm not going to find enduring happiness, as Guru Maharaj often says, in things that don't endure. With this just kind of intuition. I mean, it's interesting because Prahlad's a child, so he doesn't have really experience, at least in this life, of attaining these things, these goals, and not finding fulfillment in them. It's more just kind of through his own intuition, his own samskars, as we'll see for bhakti, that he knows. It's just part of just when he looks at something, he knows it's not a full meal. It's not going to really satisfy him. And because of that intelligence, he's described that his inner world, his kind of inner talk, his inner voice, it's described as prashant kamo, which I like that. It means like, kama means material desires, and prashant means like quiet. So because he understood the nature of the Maya Shakti, he understood the nature of kind of these facets of the world, his inner desires for them were quieted. And I think the juxtaposition between loud and quiet is pretty significant. I think we all have the experience of when we're being called by a certain desire in us. It's very loud. It's very like overbearing. And I think it's not that it necessarily is just totally disappeared in this case for Prahlad, but it describes how it becomes quieter. So that overbearing, that loudness of the desire slowly becomes quieter. It doesn't have as many arguments. In the beginning, it can convince us in this way and that way. We may refute it in one way only for it to come through another way, and then convinced us that way. So I think in that way it becomes quiet. It becomes more like singular. We're able to see it more for what it is. It's not as complex, confusing, and overwhelming. It's kind of clear. This is what it is. This is what it'll give me, and this is what it won't give me. And so when we can see reality of the temporal things of this world, when we can see those things of what they are, not that they're necessarily bad, they're not sinful. It's not this Christian idea in that sense, and we have to feel guilty and all these things, but just to see things kind of for what they are. And I think as one develops that intelligence, that intuition, then that karma, that kind of thirst for it, that voice that's very loud becomes quieter. Both in complexity, it becomes more singular, and in volume, it becomes kind of quieter. Like right now here at Madhuban, we have a lot of cicadas. So there's these bugs that like I can open the window and you can hear them. They're quite loud. But in the evening, usually around like 6 o'clock or so, when the artik starts, or kind of through the middle of the artik, they quiet down. And it's not like they just stop, but it's like a gradual kind of quieting. And there may be like kind of one last one that they can, but even that one eventually dissipates. So there's this kind of gradual quieting. It doesn't have the same power anymore over us. We can think more clearly. And so when this quiets, and this is really important because it's not just about quieting, right? We're not pursuing just the dissolution of kama, of desire, as Guru Maharaj talks about, to come to zero, moving out of the negative numbers of karma, being pulled this way, pulled that way, to come to zero. That's part of bhakti, but that's just that's just kind of the ground on which the positive numbers of devotion, of love, of hearing a new sound, hearing new desires, and those desires will get louder and louder, and they'll also overwhelm us, but in a very a way that's integral to who we are. We fit as a Jiva Shakti, we fit more naturally in Swarup Shakti. We're kind of neither here or there. We're like a spark. And so we can be in the smoke of the Maya Shakti, or the light, the fire of the Swarup Shakti. And so we kind of find our full potential. We feel, and this is really interesting, I read this recently by C.K. Chesterton. He said, humans have this kind of simultaneous desire. They want both to be in a strange, kind of astonishing new place, and also to be at home in a comfortable environment. And we want both really at the same time. If we just find comfort, it's boring. But if it's just astonished, it's just strange. If it's all new, then it's kind of disconcerting. We don't feel like we're part of it. We always feel a little bit like a foreigner. So we have this kind of simultaneous desire of wanting something strange, astonishing, bewildering, but like at home, comfortable. And so I think this is a really beautiful way to describe the Swarup Shakti. It's always astonishing, new, and that, so we hear it, the noise of the singing of the Swarup Shakti becomes louder, but it feels more at home, more integral to who we are, so we can accept and identify and really become part of it. So because that's, again, because this quieting of the material desires, this kind of I think quiet really connects strongly with simplicity. Like, the mornings, the evenings, these are kind of the quiet times of day when we do sadhana. And naturally, they're kind of like simpler times a day. Things are moving less. And I think this quieting, this kind of creating a simpler inner landscape is important in the context of bhakti, because of what it allows, the beauty. And so in that context, it also becomes beautiful, it becomes sweet. But so we read how Prahlad was not interested. He was not pulled in this way for either artha, kind of long-term, bigger goals of life, or shorter goals, kind of quick stimulation. Those were quieted. And the reason why was because of his absorption in Krishna. So I'll just read the English of some of the following verses. So this is still Yudhishthir, Narad describing to Yudhishthir the qualities of Prahlad. And so he goes on to say, Prahlad Maharaj was always absorbed in thought of Krishna. Thus, being always embraced by the Lord, he did not know how his bodily necessities, such as sitting, walking, eating, lying down, drinking, and talking, were being automatically performed. Because of advancement in Krishna consciousness, he sometimes cried, sometimes laughed, sometimes expressed jubilation, and sometimes sang loudly. Sometimes, upon seeing the Supreme Lord, Prahlad Maharaj would loudly call in full anxiety. He sometimes lost his shyness in jubilation and began dancing in ecstasy, and sometimes, being fully absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, he felt oneness and imitated the pastimes of the Lord. Sometimes, feeling the touch of the Lord's lotus hands, he became spiritually jubilant and remained silent, his hair standing on end and tears gliding down from his half-closed eyes because of his love for the Lord. So these verses just go on to really emphasize, Nard really wants to emphasize this point. This detachment is beautiful in the context of developing a higher attachment. We see this kind of dynamic as attachment to Krishna, absorption in Krishna grows, this kind of natural detachment of temporal material things slackens. And so we see I think there's kind of, in both there's a simplicity, right? There's obviously the simplicity of the detachment of Prahlad, just kind of simplifying the mind, simplifying the heart. But I think there's also, as we are kind of talking about in the introduction, there's a simplicity to his direct experience. The mind is no longer functioning in the way it does in relation to material objects. The mind's kind of shutting down for just direct personal experience between him and Krishna. So that's just kind of like Nard describing briefly the qualities of Prahlad. He talks about kind of his inner life a little. Prahlad is a great devotee. He's renounced from the material desires, and he also, as a result of, in the context of bhakti, he is developing these higher emotions for Krishna. And so we get that introduction, and then we kind of go more into the narrative of Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad's relationship. And in in Prahlad's discourses, both to Hiranyakashipu, to Hiranyakashipu's servants, and to his classmates, Prahlad is quite heavy. Even for a small child, he's quite heavy on family life, household, career. He had some very, very heavy things to say about all that. In one sense, you could say it's understandable. He didn't have the happiest family life. No, I'm just kidding. But I think it's mostly connected to, when he's heavy, it's mostly in connection to time and the use of one's time, and how kind of sacred time is, and how to use it properly, and not let it go to waste. And we're really going to dive into that subject next week. Next week we'll be talking about Prahlad and how he doesn't waste time in his service to Krishna, how he utilizes all moments in his service. So I won't go too much into that topic today, but I will. I'll just read the first verse of. So this is the first thing that Prahlad says in the 7th canto, and it's when Hiranyakashipu, Prahlad's been going to school, and so Hiranyakashipu takes him on his lap and says, what have you learned at school? This is the first time. He asks him a couple of times. So what have your teachers been teaching you? And so in answer, the first thing Prahlad says is, Tat sadhu manye suravarya dehinam sara samudvigya diyam asagrahat hitvatma patam griham andar kupam vanam gato yadarim ashrayata. And so Prahlad says, O best of the asuras, king of the demons, as far as I have learned from my spiritual master, any person who has accepted a temporary body and household life is certainly full of anxiety because of having fallen in a dark well where there is no water but only suffering. One should give up this position and go to the forest. And Prabhupada says, more clearly, when referring to the forest, one should go to Vrindavan, where only Krishna consciousness is prevalent, and should thus take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I think this idea of samudvigya, full of anxieties, is, other than the kind of time factor, which we'll go into next week, I think the anxiety of seeking material goals, material objects of pleasure is one thing that Prahlad really emphasizes. And in terms of like simplicity, if we're kind of connecting to the idea of this series, I mean, I can't think of anything less like simplicity than anxiety. For anyone who's ever experienced anxiety, it's like the most complex thing you could ever. You just can't make sense of it. Even the simplest little things, simplest little tasks and chores become almost impossible. Um, and so, anxiety has this ability to take the simplicity, the space, the freedom that's there, and kind of just clutter it with noise, clutter it with kind of a heavy um, um, a heavy cloud, um, and very disconcerting, very moving, um, hard to think clearly. And so Prahlad's just kind of stating the fact here um, that the nature of the world, the nature of the jiva, in the sense that the jiva is eternal. So the nature of the jiva's experience in relation to things that aren't eternal. The jiva is also fully knowledgeable, fully conscious in relation to things that aren't conscious. The jiva is full of bliss, full of ananda. So in relation to things that inherently are not blissful. Naturally, this is kind of a recipe for anxiety, because anxiety is when we're not receiving the goal, the satisfaction that we're seeking. So we become anxious. What can I do? What can I do? What can I fix? What can I change? What can I hold to keep it all going? Um, and so I think to see kind of that picture Prahlad's sharing, that that one should be very conscious of those things that are creating anxiety in one's life, because anxiety can make sadhana, and anxiety can make bhakti. It can take away. Bhakti is a very, very simple, direct kind of experiential practice, and so anxiety, these things can make it all very a relationship to things, anything. It can make it very complex. So Prahlad's just cautioning, I think, to try to create as much as possible as a simple space, a simple environment, a simple heart, so that we can develop, connect, deepen in bhakti. And I think we see the kind of one quality that really strikes me in Prahlad is his fearlessness. And I think, fearlessness is sometimes understood to be like strong, powerful, like these kind of very masculine, dominant qualities. But I think fearlessness can also just be like simplicity. I think when you simply approach something and not kind of thrown off by all the mental anxieties of this and that, I think one can approach things in a more fearless way. And I think, again, connecting back to like detachment, what is detachment? Detachment is kind of the ability to create free time or free space. And so I think one way we can reflect and kind of judge what our how much how much we need, how much we can give up, all these types of things, is to assess what we do with our free time. When we have free time, when we're able to make more free time and space in our lives by, maybe giving up a little here, giving up a little there. What do we do with that free time and that space? And I'd say reflecting on that can be really helpful for one, because of course the Bhagavatam can be really heavy with all these aspects of detachment and the necessity to give up this, give up that, and not be entangled in all these things. But there's also a lot of warnings too in the Bhagavatam about premature detachment and kind of giving up beyond one's ability. And actually, Prahlad even mentions that this is when he's talking to Hiranyakashipu. He says, there are 10 prescribed methods on the path of liberation: to remain silent, not to speak to anyone, to observe vows, to amass all kinds of Vedic knowledge, to undergo austerities, to study the Vedas and other Vedic literatures, to execute the duties of Varnashram Dharma, to explain the Shastras, to stay in a solitary place, to chant mantras silently, and to be absorbed in trance. So these are kind of like methods that are more connected to detachment. In the context of Bhakti, he said, these methods for liberation are generally only a professional practice and means of livelihood for those who have not conquered their senses. Because such persons are falsely proud, these procedures may not be successful. So again, we had both sides. Prahlad talks about the pitfalls, the traps of kind of pursuing material goals beyond what one needs, and then also the pitfalls of giving up, detaching oneself from material necessities beyond what one needs. And one word that really I think is nice, that describes devotees, it calls them satam. It's one way to denote a devotee. It means truthful. The devotee is very truthful. And I think in relation to this aspect of what one needs, what one can give up, what one can't give up at this time, I think that takes a lot of inner truthfulness, inner self-honesty, and to take a step, kind of create that space in one's life, create physical, mental, and emotional space. That's what detachment does. It creates all these. You create a physical space by not engaging in the activity. You can create an emotional or a mental space by not thinking about. And so I think it's easy. Obviously, it's easier to create the physical space. You can give up something on a physical platform, but whether we can further create that mental and emotional space, I think that is really something that is worth reflecting on, and kind of a continual, ongoing reflection, taking a step, seeing how it goes. Just being very wise, very conscious of how we're engaging in things and what we're doing, and kind of in a way so that we can create as much simplicity as possible in our life, in our mind, in our heart, in our emotional state. We can kind of step back as much as possible. We should really be honest, like I said, but as much as we can step back, we create this kind of inner landscape, outer landscape of simplicity, which will be really conducive um, for um, for bhakti, for devotion, um, for sangha, for all these kind of higher things um, uh, to manifest in us. And so, yeah, we see Prahlad as a beautiful example of that. And um, hopefully, hopefully through this class, we kind of can maybe start to conceptualize vairagya, detachment, in the context of bhakti. Maybe start to conceptualize it as a sweeter aspect in the context of bhakti, because what it affords, what it allows, um, how it allows one to give that much more of themselves to Krishna, and how beautiful that is when one can give any little bit more of themselves to Krishna. Um, that's beautiful. So to see vairagya in that light, and so yeah, I think that's it for today. I think next class will kind of continue, naturally progress from here into time, how to use one's time, what's it mean to waste one's time, what's it mean to not waste one's time, what's it mean to stay busy, what's the use of all these things in the context of devotion and in relation to detachment and attachment to Krishna, and yeah, how to ultimately use all these facets to create a simple heart for bhakti and love to manifest. So I think that's all I have for today on Prahlad's detachment and his love for corresponding love for Krishna. So thank you all for listening. I hope I wasn't too all over the place for you. You should see my notes. My notes are very unsimple, very hard to follow, but hopefully it made sense. So if you guys have any questions or thoughts, anything you'd like to share, I happily accept anything now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I think that's all for today. So my pranams to all devotees listening, and I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Jai Prahlad. Haribo.
Sriman Kishore Krishna Prabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Panchakapatarubhyascha kripasinubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo